America and China are both freaking paranoid that each of them is spying on one another's cables, which is why the FCC is now banning Chinese built technology from being built in undersea cables. Between 95 and 99% of all internet data is enabled by these undersea cables. America, China, and Europe to like a less extent, but America and China are basically battling for undersea domination. And only one will come out on top. I'm putting my money on America, and that's why I got Trump laughing at Xi, because America is, look, everyone rips on America for justifiable reasons. I've shown you those previous tables. I've told you how America is no longer leading in many of those sectors that it used to lead. But in this area, America's still king, man. America's taking China when it comes to the underwater battle. The story could begin in the 1800s when Britain was doing it. Before the 1840s, if you wanted to message someone, you'd have to write to them. That letter would take days to get to someone. Frickin', what was it, Romeo or Juliet killed themselves because they didn't get the letter on time. Britain built all these cables under the water, and so you got the telegram and quicker communication. Don't know if it was called MI5, MI6 back then, but British espionage, man. They started tapping these cables and started listening to them, and this leads us into the story today, because now America and China are both freaking paranoid that each of them is spying on one another's cables, which is why the FCC is now banning Chinese built technology from being built in undersea cables, at least in its own area. When you look at the undersea cables in the Atlantic and the Pacific, they're mostly American, and you know, they're being built by freaking ballers like Pichai, Zuck, Nadella, Bezos, man, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft. These are the ballers who are starting to build these undersea cables. They used to be built by companies like AT&T and Verizon and all these like old school ballers. But today, the tech titans are getting involved. Why do you think Trump had those tech titans at his inaugural, man? Standing there looking like freaking ballers, man? It's because he needs them. They need him more than he needs them, but he still needs them. Because look, this story starts in the 90s. I said it starts in the 1800s, but we're going to start the story in the 90s. This is when things were rosy. There's this telecommunications cable called FLAG. FLAG stands for Fibre-optic Link Around the Globe, and this was the first of its kind because 28,000 kilometers of undersea cable starting from the UK, going all the way to Japan. Here's a map of it. It looks pretty good, doesn't it? Wrapping around Asia, all the way to the Middle East, man. Middle East, my people, man. My original people. This was the first of its kind. Look, there were undersea cables before FLAG, but FLAG was innovative because it was the first ever fiber-optic cable that spanned across multiple continents. And this was done because this was the age of the internet. This is the 90s, man. Do you remember the 90s when like Bill Gates was the richest man in the world and the Spice Girls were having a good time and everyone was wearing like baggy trousers and stuff? And yeah, man, Labour was new, freaking new Labour, man, which was basically Tory light. But yeah, man, like new Labour was all the hype back in the day. And this cable was built connecting all these economies because this is the age of globalization. Nationalism was just such a dead thing during the 90s. The Soviet Union had fallen. Reagan destroyed Gorbachev during the Cold War, man. He finished him. The Soviet Union had its own problems. It fell primarily because of its own internal contradictions. But Reagan finished the man by pumping money into the Star Wars program. He destroyed them. The Soviet Union collapses, and suddenly the era of globalization begins when you're not just doing business with people in your own country, you're doing business with people in the world. And Americans are looking at China, which is the biggest market, right? At the time, it was either 1 billion or coming towards 1 billion people. And they're like, if we could get our businesses into China, then we can make a freaking killing, man. We can make so many millions. We can make billions, man, just by selling to China. And all these Western businessmen were getting super excited. Now, China wasn't originally involved in all these joint cable projects. You have to understand that when you build one of these cables, you have to get multiple ballers involved. America was leading Britain had a lot of old expertise. Japan was doing very well. They've got a very established player. But America was leading the charge on many of these fronts. It had built cables in the Atlantic and the Pacific and so on. And it's really a Western game still in the 90s. China's a promising thing, and Russia was having problems in the 90s. I'm not going to go into... A lot of people are like, why is Putin so angry, man? If you understood what Putin's been through, you'd understand why Putin is so angry. But I'll talk more about Putin at some other point. They're building this cable, and they're making so much money because the internet's picking up during this time, and people are like, we're going to need really big undersea cables. These cables, they're not that big, but they're like between 5 centimeters to 20 centimeters thickness, right? And they're covered, they're layered and layered and layered, because if you don't layer them, some freaking shark might come and start biting it up, or some anchor might fall and destroy it, or some vessels might accidentally destroy it. The Americans and the British and the Japanese, and they're all laying these cables. They're having a blast, and the internet's picking up, and you know they have a lot of faith in the internet because this is going to be like $1 billion, if not. I don't know if they were aware of this, but this would become $1 trillion enterprise, the internet. So they're building these cables like crazy, and at some point in the noughties, right? Early to mid noughties, the Chinese approached them, right? Now the Chinese are being represented by the 3 biggest telecommunication providers at the time. We're talking about China Telecom, China Mobile, and China Unicom. China approaches America and they're basically like, yo, do you want to like build a telecommunications cable together? We could connect it from LA or from America, LA, and we could build it all the way up to China, and this will help internet connection between our 2 countries. Verizon was the person they would approach initially. Verizon wanted to do it, but they were a little bit concerned because they knew about America and China's history. You have to understand that the US and China went to loggerheads over the island of Taiwan in 1996 after the leader of Taiwan, a guy called Lee Teng-hui, traveled to the United States to visit his old university, Cornell. The Chinese president, Jiang Zemin, feared that Lee Teng-hui was secretly working with President Clinton against him and ordered his artillery to begin firing missiles near Taiwan. Now, President Clinton dispatched 2 US aircraft carriers and forced Jiang Zemin to back down, thus resolving the 3rd Taiwan Strait crisis. But these tensions remain. I've talked about earlier in one of my earlier videos about China's old resentments about the West, understandably so. Again, I'll say it once and I'll say it again on this channel. I do not see good and bad, not really. I see 50 Shades of Grey, not the book. I don't think China's the good guy and everyone else is the bad guy. I don't believe America's the good guy and everyone else is the bad guy. I just see shades of grey, and I think there are heroes in every region of the world, and I'll happily do multiple stories glorifying the heroes of each world. Okay, so if you're enjoying this video, do give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, subscribe. And without further ado, let's continue with the story, because this story gets really good, okay, honestly. Verizon had their security concerns, but they go ahead and do the cable anyway. Remember, this is peak globalization, back when national suspicions were, relatively speaking, at an all-time low. So they go ahead and they build the cable, and this stretches from Donna Beach in Oregon, USA, to Kyoji, how do you pronounce that? Kyoji in South Korea, Qingdao and Chongmin in China, and Tanshui in Taiwan. Apologies if I mispronounced those. And for around $500 million, it was offering 60 times the previous China-US bandwidth, enabling commerce, cloud, media growth across continents, allowing some of the biggest ballers, some of the biggest upcoming ballers to get involved and maximize their profits. Between 2008 and 2015, things were pretty good between China and America, relatively speaking. That was the whole Edward Snowden thing, which I believe was the beginning of the decline. Come the mid-2010s, the relationship begins to sour, and Americans received reports that hackers widely attributed to China had breached the OPM databases, right? So the OPM is the US Office of Personal Management, and is largely responsible for keeping a lot of personal information. Critics will obviously say that, you know, this is America basically getting a taste of its own medicine. America was spying on China way before China was spying on America. Edward Snowden revealed that Huawei was one of the companies that the NSA had begun spying on, remember? But look, governments spy on one another. I think America spies on its own allies. So it happened, but either way, Obama still wasn't happy. And so what Obama does, he summons Xi Jinping to America, he calls him over, and they have a word. And Obama's like, well, you know, what's going on? And they come to some kind of cyber agreement where they promise to not, what's the exact word? Not support cyber-enabled intellectual property theft. But in practice, this fell short because it didn't apply to the realms of politics, military, or intelligence cyber espionage. So they would carry on doing it. And this would really destroy relations later on, especially when Trump gets involved. Towards Obama's final years and then the first years of Trump, a lot of Western businessmen were still, this was like nothing for them. They didn't even want to know about it. I mean, some of them were concerned because some of them were concerned that China subsidizing its own industries would help those industries, its own industries, outcompete them. So this happened with the chip industry, for example. But a lot of them, your Tim Cooks, your Sundar Pichais, a lot of these businessmen, your Mark Zuckerbergs, they didn't really want to hear this national security stuff. They kind of just wanted to expand their businesses and make money in China. And so what happens in 2019 is Sundar Pichai and Mark Zuckerberg are about to start some new line, a joint venture. This was the first cable owned and operated by a major non-telecom company, so it was a big deal. And they're readying themselves for this joint venture. They're going and doing it, and then with this Hong Kong-based company called Dr. Peng Limited to build this 8,000-mile internet broadband cable from LA to Hong Kong. It's called the Pacific Light Cable Network. And Trump basically comes in and stops the deal, right? So you got to bear in mind that Trump is way more hawkish on China than Obama was. You know, towards the end of his time, Obama was getting a bit concerned about China. But, you know, his famous line is, we'll just win the race by outrunning them, right? Trump's way harder than China. He comes in and actually sabotages deals. He teams up with freaking Shinzo Abe and takes down one of their companies. I mean, I mentioned this in a previous video, so go check that one out. Trump isn't having any of it, and he gets these guys called Team Telecom, right? Team Telecom are nasty, man. Like, for China, they're nasty, right? They were created in April 2020 by an executive order and set up to officially safeguard US telecommunication networks from spies and cyber attacks. You suddenly got all these US ambassadors going around the world and like going up to places like India and Bangladesh and all these countries and Singapore, and basically pressuring them to not partake in joint cable projects with China. I've got a picture on the screen. This is one senior Asia Telecom executive recalling a meeting, basically saying that if we didn't stop, we'd go bankrupt. It was a persuasive argument, he told the executive at Reuters. Fearful of the punishments the US could inflict on them, they decided to partner up with US companies like Subcom rather than Huawei or anyone like that. Just to be clear, Huawei is the one who's building China's cables, and then China Telecom, China Mobile, and Unicom are the ones who own it and fund it. Basically, it's like a joint project. Now, the craziest thing about this is America pressures these countries to avoid China, right? So, for example, China will offer to build a cable for like $400 million with these countries. Now, America will go tell these countries to not join China, and then America charges these countries $600 million to build the cable. So it's a bit nasty. Okay, but it's also kind of funny. And now at the time, Pichai and Zuck were pretty annoyed by this. They went up to the FCC and were like, what the hell are you doing? Like, these are, the exact quote was that Team Telecom's argument that China would intercept their data was unsupported and speculative. But Trump and Pompeo and the FCC and Team Telecom basically aren't budging. And they're like, no, you're not doing this, man. And eventually the tech titans come on board, okay? They would eventually do other projects without the Chinese. And this all climaxes with the banning of Huawei, okay? So Huawei Marine Network was a subsidiary of Huawei's, right? And they were building all these cables. And Trump, and this is the start of it, Trump comes and starts asking all the allies, pressuring them to ban Huawei. You're getting Huawei, destroying Huawei, kicking Huawei out of their countries. Trump goes up to like 60 countries and gets all of them on side. Some of them were a bit reluctant at first. You had like the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan were the ones who were maybe the most willing to go along with Trump. Canada was hella reluctant at first, but then Canada would eventually come round. I think Australia was the first to ban Huawei. I'd have to double check that. And Trump's like, you're not having this company in your country. And then eventually a lot of other countries would accept. Okay, not everyone. There's a lot of countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia that have accepted Huawei. But there's also a lot of countries that have gone along with what Trump wanted, basically. By December 2020, over 60 nations representing 2/3 of global GDP and 200 telecom firms had committed to the Clean Network. So the Clean Network is basically submarine cables, cloud service, mobile carriers, mobile apps, data storage, all of them clean from China. A lot of the business that would have gone to China was instead given to players like Nokia, Ericsson, Cisco, and Fujitsu. Huawei was damaged, but not as much as a lot of people said. Data suggests that Trump and Biden's attacks played a significant role in shaving off some 25% of Huawei's revenue between 2021 and 2022. But Huawei is a hell of a company, man, and China would come back. Xi Jinping would come back, man, with the peace cable, right? So China Unicom and the Chinese government began constructing the Pakistan and East Africa Connecting Europe cable, otherwise known as the Peace Cable. This cable was over 15,000 kilometers long, connecting Asia, Pakistan, East Africa, and it planned to expand to 25,000 kilometers, 24 terabytes per fiber cable, beating many Western cables. This is when Biden's like had enough. He's like, nah, man, you're not doing this. And what happens is Biden gets Jessica Rosenworcel, head of the FCC, in March 2022 to revoke Section 214, banning Chinese telecom firms such as Chinese Unicom, Pacific Networks, and so on. So America's currently winning the undersea cable battle. When you look at all of these factors, America is winning. They still have the ability to exclude rivals from deals, though this is weakening. But China is making ground, especially in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, okay? This undersea cable is really important because, if these cables are cut, which there have been some reports that there have been some people allegedly trying to cut these cables, well, then the internet's down. And if the internet's down, the global economy is destroyed, because the global economy today is basically depends on the internet. So if Putin or Xi or even Trump, right, if any of these borders cut one another's cables, they destroy one another's economies. But it's such a controversial move that I don't think any of them are. None of them have been caught doing it. If they're ever caught doing it, they say it would have accidentally have happened. You know. I also want to look at cyber warfare in future episodes, and I'll put some really cool visuals up, some Tron-like visuals up for that one, because that's connected to the cable story as well. If you've enjoyed this video, then do give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, subscribe. World Order covers all things power, wealth, and technology. That you're watching the World Order show, but I will eventually be releasing the World Order Black Labels again. I cannot wait for the comeback of the Black Labels. So yeah, dude, guys, hit the bell icon as well, because those are going to be sick, man. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next week, man. Look at either cybersecurity or the Europe story next week. See you then. Bye-bye.